Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. My name is Alexander Howe. They call me the Bush Ninja. I've been traveling Southern Africa since 2011. I've spent almost 6 years on the ground. And I'm here representing my new company, Mamma Kanna, which is, I wanted to channel both the beauty of Mama Africa and this plant that is one of our oldest human-used plants. And so it has such a huge potential to help the people of our country and world that it's my joy and delight to bring it back into our human awareness. And so a little bit about myself, who's the Bush Ninja, that's me. I've been traveling since 2011. I first went to South Africa. Things in my life actually kind of fell apart. I used to be a park ranger. I used to try to play the game in the government and didn't play the game well enough, it seemed, and things fell apart in my life. And I ended up having some friends in South Africa through the International Wilderness Guides Council who do ecotherapy. And they invited me to come and work with them. And so, why did I go to Africa when things fell apart? It's because I had friends there. And it was interesting because at that point, I had this whole dream of who and what I wanted to be, and that dream was kind of shattered. And I had to put the pieces back together in this colorful mosaic that I am now. Thank you. So, bad things happen, and they happen for reasons. And there's lots of reasons, maybe, not like a reason, but lots of reasons that things happen. But it's really what you do with the pieces after the things happen. So my path and journey brought me on to Southern Africa to start putting myself back together. And I started learning about the medicines that came from all of our ancestral homeland. Kind of the beauty of my journey there was, part of that was realizing that this is medicine for every human. We have medicines that we're kind of learning about and exhibiting at this conference from around the world. Medicines from South America, medicines from the Far East. And all humans, as we know, come from Africa. So at some point back, if you go far enough back, this is our blood heritage. And so the first thing I like to do when I start like a talk like this is to just really call in the appreciation to the spirit of our ancestors. Everyone's ancestors are in this room. These chairs are full right now. And we have the ancestors of this land and the people who first populated it. And each of your ancestors are standing behind you. There's a word in Xhosa, it's tamaku. Tamaku means I see you. But it means more than I see you. It says, I see you and all of your ancestors standing behind you. I see every step of the way that brought them to where they had to bring you to here. And so, Tamaku, I see you. Thank you for coming to see me. And so I appreciate my ancestors and everything that they did to bring me to this moment. And I appreciate your ancestors and call them in. And we just delight in their presence and welcome them. And so as I went to South Africa and I started learning and teaching, I had a passion and interest in herbalism because of its efficacy. I saw it working, and I had a series of experiences on how plants really helped people. And it wasn't, I can totally resonate with energetic and what I call like the tongue-in-cheek call woo-woo type stuff, and I love the woo-woo, I'm happy to woo with you. But I also love science and chemistry, and I love empiricism. And I witnessed an empirical use of various plants and how they can help people, and how the Western medicine doctors don't necessarily have some of those options. And why not use all of the options? We have this toolkit, almost a beautiful bouquet of medicine. And by all means, go to the Western doctors and speak to your doctors. I'm not discounting the efficacy of Western medicine, but also know that there are ancestral medicines that we literally co-evolved alongside with as a species that work with mechanisms in our body that can help us as well. And so part of my journey was teaching about practical herbalism. That's something I'm really interested in, is do-it-yourself plant medicine, enabling people how to gain better control of their own health and wellness. And then as I traveled, I would sit with traditional healers and of all different types and tribes and sorts. And I would go and I would ask them some questions and just have a moment of their time. And it was really a blessing and a beautiful journey. And early on, and back in 2011, I encountered Kanna. It's not new. It's old as it comes, really. It's one of the oldest human-used plants. And people have been using it since the dawn of humanity. But there's a few reasons maybe why it hasn't kind of come to our cultural awareness. And one of them, Pete kind of spoke about. What is Kanna? And like Kanna sounds like kava, sounds like cannabis, kratom, cacao, coca, coffee. How interesting that all of these mind-altering or affecting plants have these indigenous names from around the world that just came out of their mouths with a similar sound. How fascinating. So Kanna, I think it's a matter of brand identity. It's partly why people haven't heard about it. And also, it's a gentle medicine. It doesn't like have that transactional response that we're used to when you like smoke some marijuana and then you're high, or you have a few shots and then you get drunk pretty immediately. It works in a different way, and we're going to talk about that. And so it does exist in a lot of, if you go to like the party scene in South Africa, there'll be a Kanna booth and someone's selling it, and I first encountered it with just the whole raw plant ground up and put into some honey, and that makes it kind of nice to eat it. It was traditionally chewed. And there's other ways, and we'll get to that as well. And so it's there, but it never really took off there in a huge way too, because it's kind of their medicine and they're used to it and people have heard of it. And they don't even call it Kanna, they call it by its scientific name, they call it Sceletium. And so here it is. What is it? This is actually a picture I took outside of a restaurant at a mall where it was growing in like an ornamental bush situation. And it's got this pretty happy little flower. And it's a succulent. And it's part of the Azoaceae family. It's in the ice plant family. So it's like got this beautiful succulent leaves, and it was traditionally chewed on. And they would dry it, they would crush it and ferment it, and the fermentation process affects some of the alkaloidal profiles, which we don't have to go into. But it was used by the indigenous people in their most sacred healing rituals, which are dances. And so the people would chew it, and in fact, one of its common names, Khoikhoi, means stuff that is chewed. And so literally it was like the name was the use. And so they chew and chew and chew, and they dance and dance and dance. And they would sniff it as well. It was also insuffulated. And they would smoke it. I also have herbal smoking blends that mix it well with it. And they would make a brew out of it. And almost every way they could have it, they would consume it. And while they were dancing and chanting and drumming and clapping, all the while you're doing this, you're releasing serotonin. And so this, unlike some of the other things, it doesn't make you kind of high on its own. It retains your own naturally released serotonin, so you're getting high on your own supply. And so it doesn't have like the come down or the side effects or the hangovers of things like MDMA. And it also like has this safe known use in even massive doses. The only contraindication is with pharmaceutical antidepressants. And even a lot of the other like big companies, because I'm just real old me doing a thing, trying to do it in a good way. And there are bigger companies kind of starting this wave right now, and not all of them put the warnings on the labels. I don't even know the legality of that story actually, but I have seen some of the things, and I'm like, oh, they don't necessarily say, hey, you shouldn't mix this with antidepressants. And in one hand, it's because it's quite gentle, and it's probably fine, and I can't really know that to be true. But I also want people to be informed. And so you should have conscious awareness that you really ought to not mix anything that's an SSRI with MAOIs or SNRIs or any other neurotransmitter affecting compounds, of course. And so, but this has been used safely, even by mothers and pregnant and breastfeeding. It was used for babies who had colic, and it has other traditional uses. It was chewed to slack thirst, to reduce pain and hunger by the indigenous people, the San, as they would like track for days a kudu that they shot with a little poison arrow, and they would track and go. And then in their most sacred healing rituals, which are dances. And if anybody's really experienced the beauty of dance medicine, it can be really healing on its own. It's one of the first human medicines, is dancing. And so this is the original dancing medicine. And So we co-evolved with this plant, and my little typo there, sorry, I just noticed it. But here we are as humanity, even pre-Homo sapiens, and this plant is in the area where these humans are evolving. And, so mechanisms in our brain, kind of co-evolved alongside the things that we had around us in our environment. We would evolve the ability to make things we didn't have. Like, for example, tigers can make their own vitamin C, but humans had it in our diet, so we didn't need to make it, kind of thing. And so in this case, this can act like a key in a lock for certain brains, it seems. A lot of what I'm going to tell you is about anecdotal experiences that I've made and heard from people who have worked with the medicine. Because there's not a ton out there about with good hard science, and it's because it's a natural organic plant, it affects every brain differently. That's kind of one of the things we like about drugs and pharmaceuticals, and what the FDA is into is that they're looking for a really standardized action for like exactly how it's going to affect most brains, most bodies, most of the times, at what dosage and all that stuff. This is an organic plant compound, and it doesn't really work the same way for every body. And so part of the journey of me offering it is to be able to help guide people on how it might help you or affect your body, and the benefits it could potentially give you. And also, some people don't react the same way to it. So moving on. So chemistries and actions. A lot of the purported effects, and also my experience and secondary experiences from offering it to people, are among these lists. Because it's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, it can be extremely helpful for depression, as well as anxiety, and as a mood uplifter. It was traditionally used for these factors. It can really be calming and grounding. It's almost a little bit adaptogenic. So if you take it kind of like at the end of the night, and you're relaxing and you're winding down, and you're depleted after a long day of doing whatever it was you were doing. Maybe you went to a big expo where you got on stage and you were kind of nervous about it, and you're talking in front of a group of people, and so your serotonin's kind of going off. Well, at the end of the day, this can help you relax and calm down, and in fact was used traditionally for insomnia. And then traditionally, of course, it was an appetite suppressant, but don't necessarily tell that to the world, because then everybody's going to try to make the next diet drug out of it. But I have had a friend of mine who has been taking it for her depression, and she's like, hey, I'm not getting as hungry. And it's interesting because that last action is that it's helpful for addiction. And so a lot of addiction is serotonin chasing. And so when you have whatever it is that you're addicted to, whether it's a substance or a behavior, it feels good. But then as you get addicted, you get less of a hit. So you have to take another hit kind of thing. So you have to have another drink. You have to have, the next Oreo if you're a food, if that's your whatever it is that your addiction is. So because this retains the serotonin, it helps you not have that craving as much. And so the way I like to say it is it kind of pulls the hooks out of whatever it is that you're craving. And so it can be really helpful for many forms of addiction. And so in inflammation and cognition, it's got some limited science coming out about how it can help reduce cytokine, which is can affect inflammation in the body, and can also help cognition and focus too. So lots of possible benefits for a person to have if they're working with this medicine. It does have these alkaloids that are in it. The active alkaloids are mesembryne and mesembrynone. It's in the mesem family of plants. And these are all unique in tortuosamine, and there's more. The two that are most studied are the first two, and they're kind of almost akin to the THC CBD. Almost if you look at the properties, they'll kind of mirror those. Though it's of course not a cannabinoid. It does act as a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and this is its antidepressant action, and also why you have to be careful about combining it with pharmaceutical antidepressants. And just because, you don't want to be mixing those things. We don't know how it interacts with the pharmaceuticals because that wasn't studied. What we do know is that this plant is as old as humanity, and it's been used in massive doses safely since the dawn of time. And so just, to be safe, we don't know how it would interact with things, but it can be really helpful for people who maybe don't want to go on to the pharmaceutical antidepressants like the Zoloft and the Prozacs, or maybe they've come off of them and like they don't like the side effects because it doesn't have the Kanna won't, you don't have to like wean on it and wean off of it and have that build up, and you don't have like a zombie-like state where you're not having any emotions and things that you hear some of the negative side effects of some of the chemical SSRIs. And so we call it an SRI, it's not necessarily a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, so it's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. We call it that, but we don't necessarily want to equivocate it to pharmaceuticals, because while it has a similar action, they're also pretty different. So it's worth making a personal journey and seeing how it might help you in your body. It also acts on the phosphodiesterase 4 inhibition factor, which can increase energy in the body, and other VMAT2 activation activates dopamine, serotonin, and GABA inhibitor. So it's more than just serotonin, it does also affect dopamine and other neurotransmitters, norepinephrine. And so calling it just a blanket SRI is also not accurate enough. But it's a complex, whole plant being. And so, I won't get too nerdy about the chemistry side of it, but I do want you to realize that it's not just the same as like a pure drug, pharmaceutical, Prozac type thing. But the analogy I like to use is that your mind is like a leaky toilet. Everybody can appreciate that. You've got serotonin in the tank, and it's leaking down into your mind, and it's supposed to do that, and it keeps everything fresh and flowing. And this is just an analogy, but maybe some forms of depression, maybe the toilet's not really leaking. Maybe you're not getting enough serotonin. Or maybe the hole at the bottom of the bowl is so big that the serotonin is not really swirling around and it just runs right out. It's not being retained. That's not really how depression works, but that's an analogy. And so when you take a drug like MDMA or MDA, what it does is it flushes the toilet. And so all that serotonin comes down into your mind and you have that big rush. And it feels really great because you're really high on all that serotonin. And the harm from that drug isn't necessarily the first dose, is what they've seen. It's the repeated dosage after that. So if you take it the next day and you're at the festival, that does a lot more harm to your brain than if you haven't ever done it before in your life, or you only do it once a year or something like that. And so it's trying to flush the toilet before the tank has a chance to refill. And it's like you can break the mechanism by trying to do that. So just so you all know, that's one of the big truths about that drug and why they can use it in pharmacology, in therapy, safely under clinical settings and have that effect without it necessarily being a destructive compound if you're using it in a good way. But this isn't about that, this is about Kanna. And Kanna doesn't flush the toilet at all. It doesn't cause you to release serotonin. What it does, it narrows the hole at the bottom of the bowl. So whatever you release, naturally or unnaturally, swirls around just a little bit longer. The more you take, maybe the bowl narrows more, and you start feeling more happy and euphoric, and it has like a cumulative dosage that brings it a genuine euphoria. So in terms of how it works, is that if you take a tonic dose, is what I would call, of like 1 to 3 doses per day, that can help with anxiety and depression. And I keep it in what I call my emotional first aid kit. And it's safe to use every day. You can use it even on a greater dosage level every day. And it's got lots of history and study behind even, like I said, the ritual level doses of massive use. And it's known to be safe at all of those dosages. But the way to have it isn't to take one massive dose, because again, it's not making your brain dump serotonin, it's retaining it. So you wanna, let me go on to the next slide. So we wanna do a procedure of dosing, to have the recreational effect. You dose every about 45 minutes or so. And so the forms that it can come in, that you might see it, and that even I have many of these forms offered, and some of the other folks out there in the world are offering some of these forms, so I included all of them. So the herb itself, and if you come over to my table, I've got the herb there to show you, and I've got a book here in fact that I'll pass around. We don't have a ton of hands to show, but you guys can pass that around hopefully, and you can see a picture of the plant itself, and it's one of the traditional forms of preparation. And I love the title of this chapter because it says "Chewing on Happiness," and I love like having legitimate, published herbalism books that really give it there's just a little more credibility to a published book, especially because this was made before the internet was as pervasive perhaps as it is today. And you can find anything on the internet. So it's nice that it had to go through the publishing process. And so we have extract, and I'll take the extract and I make a honey elixir out of it. That's our primary Mamma Kanna product here. And this is my little sample jar. This is kind of what the honey elixir looks like. And so I took a gram of the extract and I dissolved it in vanilla extract and glycerin and honey, raw honey. And then that made it taste really nice because the extract's pretty bitter. And one squirt of this bottle is one dose. And afterwards I'm happy to give everybody some. And there's also snuff, and I'm actually working, one of the reasons I invested in the alkaloidal extract powder, which in my mind is kind of like the drug version of the plant, because you're doing an extracted, isolated, or concentrated compound that's got pure alkaloidal profiles. And I'm not anti-drugs, I just define them as that. They're extracted, isolated, or synthesized compounds that are pulled out of the plant in a natural way, and in an unnatural way. And so one of the reasons I chose to go to that level was because of two stories that I had heard from friends. And I'm jumping ahead with my success stories, I think is the next slide, but this is not really my success story. It was one of the reasons I got into this. And those two friends both worked in the festival scene in South Africa. One of them was a photographer, so I'll use his example. And he admittedly had become addicted to cocaine. And he was able to use the alkaloidal powder as a replacement therapy for his cocaine addiction. And so much, he explained to me, so much of the addiction was also the proverbial smoke break. Not only are we addicted to the tobacco and the nicotine, but we're addicted to standing outside for 5 minutes and breathing a little bit. And it's not socially acceptable to just say, hey, I need to go outside and breathe for 5 minutes. But you can go smoke a cigarette, and that self-destructive thing is totally acceptable in America. But for them, it was okay, leaving the party, it was a trance party. Trance is huge in South Africa, so it's lights, it's doof, 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 it's intensity. And so they'd go to the van, him and his three friends, they'd chop up their lines, they'd have their substance of choice. And this is something that we've been doing since the dawn of time. Kanna was traditionally sniffed, as a powdered plant, not as an alkaloidal extract, of course, which is a big difference. But traditionally, that's not even sniffing things as a human thing to do, honestly. And so, but that cocaine, that's a destructive, addictive compound, and especially because you can't really ever get clean cocaine, obviously. And so they would still be able to go and do the ritual, and my friend would even be able to have the social component of going with his friends if they wanted to do whatever they wanted to do. And they would chop up their lines, and then they would have their line, and they would go back out into the party, and it had an effect. So that's how you're gonna feel it, is if you sniff it, honestly, you're gonna feel that, because that's the quickest way to get it into your bloodstream. And so it wasn't like they were sniffing a line of chalk, it still had an effect on them. But because of that anti-addictive behavior or mechanism, it actually allowed him and my other friend, almost the exact same story, to kick cocaine completely in 3 weeks of having it as a replacement therapy. So when I heard that story the second time, I was like, oh wow, I'm gonna help a lot of my friends, because if anybody's ever gone skiing in Miami, I hear it's very popular. And so I know a lot of friends in the party scene who are looking for something to help them, because it's so much easier to be instead of a no, I'm not going to do the thing that everybody else is doing, let me rather yes, and I'm going to do my own thing. And here, you want to try my thing? It's a cool, different thing. You can try it. Everybody likes a new, cool, different thing. So I'm actually working on a snuff that is a completely legal insnuffulant that one could potentially use as a replacement therapy for any kind of powder addiction that you like to sniff. So the thing about chews, I've got there's another company out there that's made some chews, and that's online with the traditional use. It was traditionally chewed, as it were, and then of course it tinctures really well. If you want to take some of the raw plant, you can make your own tincture, and that's a really great way to have it with you, and you're not chewing on plant dust, which not everybody likes. I like to chew on plant dust, but not everybody likes that. And I think the best way to take medicine is the way you're most likely to take it. And so that's why I made a sweet tasting honey elixir out of because it's enjoyable as well. And even though medicine often doesn't taste great, it's nice when medicine does taste nice, honestly. And so the thing about Kanna, I've heard some people having a non-result. And one is it's a gentle medicine. It doesn't have that transactional high. It doesn't say, oh, I'm taking it and then I'm getting high. It's retaining your own serotonin. So you have to be releasing serotonin. So traditionally it was used while dancing. It's the original dancing medicine, like I was saying. And so they would dance and they would chew and they would have it. It also supports any other serotogenic medicines you might take, like psilocybin. And so I enjoy personally mixing it with my mushrooms because it just helps keep it up, helps keep it euphoric and uplifted. And so it can help some folks not have a challenging or darker experience if they pair it together. It plays well with pretty much anything natural. Cacao as well, because of the anandamide and theobromine in cacao. They pair really well. And in fact, I offer cacao Kanna experiences to ecstatic dance groups and things like that. I don't ever call it a ceremony because I don't think someone who looks like me should be selling ceremony, frankly. And so I'm really cautious around the use of ceremony and economics. And so I'm happy to offer experiences though, because these two plants never met on a traditional level. So I'm gonna hold that, still thanking the indigenous cultures that brought them to us, and recognize that I'm not replicating or stealing or appropriating their ceremonies. And so the tonic dose, like I said, is my emotional first aid kit. You can take it whenever you're just feeling a little blue. It's not gonna make you really high. Most people don't feel one dose, some people do. And so I keep my dosage on this. Online, if you read about the dosages, it's a pretty broad range. And I've seen that higher range of dosage, when people are sensitive, it's too much. And so I put my dosage kind of right in the middle, because that's kind of arbitrary internet information, frankly, and now mine's coming through a lot of experiences of sharing it with people. And so I'd rather not have the uncomfortable experiences, and most people, again, don't really feel it in the one dose, because it is working though, it's working immediately, but it's not causing you to dump serotonin, so you're not gonna get a high off of it. But if you're having a fun day at an expo, and you keep having it every 45 minutes or so, that's the recreational dose. So if you came to my table yesterday, as I was sharing it all day long, around the afternoon I was feeling quite euphoric. And I was a little bit extra chatty, because I was doing what I love. And so that's the thing, is you gotta pair it with something that you enjoy doing. Don't just take a bunch of Kanna and sit on your couch and watch TV. Then you're not gonna really feel it, and people are like, oh, that didn't do anything. But instead, go do something that you're gonna enjoy, or even something that you might not really. Somebody asked me today, she's like, can I take this before I go to a party I don't really wanna go to? And it'll help me enjoy it more. And I was like, actually, that's a very effective possible use for this. Take some before as you're getting ready, take some when you get in the car, take some when you get there, and then after that, you might actually have a little bit of a boost out of it. But it's a gentle medicine, like I said. And so I think people are ready for gentle medicine in today's age. We don't all need to just get clopped, as they would say in South Africa, with an action that's just whoa. And you can dose it a little more consciously and a little more appropriately, and honestly a little more respectfully. And then there's the ritual level dose. Now, I've actually never gone that far, because that's a lot. And in those ritual level doses, the indigenous people would have these heightened states of transformational euphoria where they would perceive themselves transforming into animal-human hybrids and being able to enact magical healing. And there was one quote from the university or the museum in Cape Town at the Natural History Museum. I'll do my best to remember it. The medicine man was blind, and he said when they were doing the dance, the creator would come and he would pluck his eyeballs out of his sockets and put him in a bag on his waist, on the creator's waist. And then he would be able to see, and then he would be able to heal. So that's the level they were getting to. and so when I take it, it's one of those things that you just don't need to chase the dragon. You know, yesterday when I was feeling great, I didn't need to have more to feel more great. I was like, I feel great, and then like that was enough. And that's really nice. And that's why and how it helps with the other addictions is that you can still have the thing. It's traditionally used for alcoholism. In fact, one of its other names translates to our dry liquor. And because people would bring it to help combat alcoholism, which is rampant in Southern Africa and with all indigenous communities, part of our colonial heritage. And so you can still have alcohol. It's not like anti-abuse where you're gonna get sick, but you are less likely to like crave the next one. You're more likely to be like, hey, I'm good now. I feel good. The buzz is where I want to be. I don't need to drink a 12-pack of beer. You know, I can just have a couple and be good. And that's the conscious awareness part of it and the pulling of the hooks out, like I say. So some of the success stories. The one, like I told you, was the cocaine addiction success stories. Two different people, almost the exact same story, was one of the reasons I like kind of pulled the trigger on a major investment and change in my life and making this business happen. But some of the other success stories, like I have a very dear friend, it's like a depression story. And she has chronic depression. You know, she doesn't, in this moment, it wasn't being triggered by anything in particular. It was just like, you know, it's hard to get out of bed. It's hard to take care of herself. And I'd come over the night before visiting her and another friend, and I knew the medicine really helps her, so I'd given her some like the night before, and she went to bed. And she woke up the next day, and she like got up, and she was doing, I feel good today. And she like made the bed, and she like took a shower, and she cleansed herself, and she got ready, and she was like washing the dishes, and she started whistling. And she's like, whoa, I'm like having a good day. I'm having what many people would call a normal day. And she was like really like shocked at that. What was different? She's like, oh, I had that Kanna the night before. So here it is, long after like the active, you know, where you would maybe feel it, especially if you were going a recreational phase, which is like a couple hours. After you stop taking it, you maybe have like a come down of like 2 or 3 hours. But here it is, 12 hours later or so, and she had retained the serotonin in her brain. Her brain's chemistry really responded well to those tiny doses. And so how cool is that? That here this person who didn't want to take pharmaceuticals was able to work with this plant extract that was pretty phenomenal. I had a woman, she called me on it was like the day after Christmas a couple years ago, and I made some capsules out of the plant. And she told me, you know, her and her son had gotten at it over politics and left and right, red and blue, donkeys and elephants and stuff like that. And she got really upset. But she was able, instead of she said, I know me, I know my demons. She was a middle-aged, she was actually probably like mid to late 50s, I want to say. And she said she knows her demons really well. And she should have been in bed all day the next day because Christmas was ruined in her mind, you know, and it was family stuff, and we all know how that can go. And she called me, I wish I had recorded this phone call or something, or had just a voicemail from her, because she was almost in tears because she was able to stand in her own power about it, and she was able to just move on with her day and her life and her stuff. And it was really helpful to her. In my own body, like I said, I use it in my emotional first aid kit. And one of the best case uses that I have from my experiences was, there was this one time with a girlfriend, and we were on our way to an event, and she was driving my van, and I hadn't packed it well enough, and she's an Uber driver from Baltimore, so she was driving like that, and stuff had fallen, and it landed on my new computer, which I hadn't put away properly, and it was an accident. It was nobody's fault. It was both of our faults, and we had it out, and we were over it. And we resolved, the thing, but we had kind of had a little conflict, and so there was still just that like ickiness between us, and neither of us wanted it. We were just getting to the festival, and we took some of the medicine, and we decided, like, let's go have fun. It's over, it happened, we forgive each other, it's nobody's fault. And she said, this is her words, she's like, it's like a cloud lifted, and it helped us get back to loving again. So that's a really beautiful way if you're having conflict for people. It's not gonna intoxicate you. You're not gonna get a high off of it, and if you're looking for that, you'll be disappointed. The reason it has the English common name, so the indigenous people, they would do that dance, the San would do that dance, and they would get to that state that I referred to, and hence the English common name is Bushman's Ecstasy. And so, on one hand, that's cool, but on the other hand, it's not really accurate. So, but it is closest to that. If you do get to those states of euphoria, like kind of what I was feeling yesterday, it was a little bit of like that moment when you're coming up. It was that natural kind of euphoria rush without getting anywhere to the actual rushy parts of it. So those are just some success stories. So all of this goes to say, and I'm happy to like educate, and we can do a Q&A in just a second, but the most important thing about what I'm doing with this work is there are some people who are responsible for us having this medicine, for me standing here. And those are the indigenous people of Southern Africa. There are two main groups of people that they kind of group together because they're so underrepresented that they have to. So they're called Khoisan, but there's the Khoikhoi and the San people. And they're different, completely different cultural groups. But they both are the indigenous peoples of Southern Africa. And that's my friend Pete Behrens, and he has an amazing project called Bushman Song, where he wears traditional garb, and they walk, him and his compatriots, they walk for days, just like that was the way that humans got around for a really long time, and they stop at schools along the way, and they teach about cultural heritage. And then, just recently, this was really cool, they just had the first annual San Cultural Festival in Namibia. Now, anytime I see another company popping up in this space, I ask them, what are you doing to support the indigenous people who carried this medicine forward through time for us? There's so much that we've lost that we don't even know because we don't have those people anymore, and it's largely my closer ancestry's fault for that. And so it's really important to me as a business. I do 11% of all proceeds gross off the top go directly to indigenous rights activism in South Africa. And thank you. They say that in the Bible, the tithe is 10%. That's what you're kind of supposed to give if you're a good biblical person. Well, I think that everyone should do a little bit more than what they're kind of supposed to. And so that's why I chose 11%. And I also recognize that while this might be the next big thing, it's the new old kid on the block, it wouldn't be here if it weren't for these people carrying this. Nobody of our folk would have gone and just chewed on that little succulent plant and found out about that on their own. So it's their indigenous people that really deserve that support. And when I message the other companies and I say, hey, what are you doing to support indigenous rights activism in South Africa? And they're like, oh, well, our supplier has to give money to them, which is legally required in South Africa, it's true. And when we're looking for the right nonprofit to support, and I'm like, okay, that's cool, but Pete doesn't have a nonprofit. There's a lot of red tape, and he's a Bushman. I actually asked him what tribe he was part of, because the San is just an overarching term, and there's other tribal groups, like the Komani San people are some of my friends. And he's like, I'm a Bushman. I'm like, okay, I thought that was pejorative. But it's like when Native American people can choose to call themselves Indian if they want to, that's their choice for sure. But so Pete is representing his people and doing all this work, and he doesn't hardly make a dime out of that. They're not sponsored. They don't get kind of help, and they're kind of looked down upon by the greater cultural groups of all over South Africa. You know, they have this underrepresentation that's tragic. There's 11 official languages in South Africa. The indigenous language is not one of them. So it's been really a beautiful thing for my tiny little company to be able to offer our small portion, my small portion, just little old me here, to support projects like this who aren't NGOs. And I don't care about tax write-offs, honestly. I'm not doing it for that. I'm doing it because I made a contract with the spirit of my ancestors that allows me to stand here in front of you today because I do it with integrity. So, thank you. And so just so you know, if you're supporting me in any of my projects, you're directly supporting these people. I do want to make a very specific plug for the San Cultural Festival. I was able to support them with the small amount I was able to with the budget that I have, kind of thing. And the festival went off successfully, but they did message me and they did say that they weren't able to quite make enough. They are in the red. So if anybody wants to offer just a donation, I would personally and directly send it to these people so that they can support their project so that this can happen again, because this was the first time it had ever happened. It's almost 2024, you know, and now they have a San Cultural Festival. So if anybody's interested in that, you know, you're welcome to talk to me afterwards. And at this point, I'd love to take some questions if anybody has any. That's a great question. So the question was, you know, I went over there to learn and work with indigenous people and tribes and traditional healers. Well, really to put myself back together, but I visited them and learned from them as part of the journey. And what was one of my biggest takeaways? I would say my favorite question to ask when I would visit a traditional healer was not, do you, but how do you give gratitude before taking from nature? And because it was implicit that there was no just like taking. There was a gift first. And so some of the most interesting answers came out of that question. One of the men, in fact, the Bushman, the Kriya man, the herb man of the Kamani San people, Umyan, he would say, I will give a piece of my hair. And he had tiny, tiny little dreadlocks, many tiny little dreadlocks. And he would give a piece of his hair or a piece of his cloth, but it had to have his sweat upon it. Another one of the indigenous folks, they would, when they took from the plant, they would lick and apply their saliva to the wound and tell the plant what they were using it for. So I'm going to collect this plant because I need it for my grandmother for her lungs. Another one one of the first things I learned when I first came to the mountain where I stayed was we had a jar of copper coins, like pennies effectively, worth even less than pennies, of course, because of the exchange rate. And if we ever took any plants, we would pay for them with money by giving the coins. Now, it wasn't a value exchange, but it was an energetic exchange. And so I remember once my neighbor at the met down the mountain, his name is Harvey, he came up to find a root that would help his wife. She had a broken tooth, and the root would help bring the tooth out of her mouth. And we went to dig the hole, and we put the money in. And then I went to cover it up, and he was like, no. And I'm like, I don't speak Afrikaans. Ik kan niet praat Afrikaans niet. And now I can a little bit. This is early in the journey. And I don't know why he didn't want me to cover the hole. But like my logical left brain, which doesn't always play a point here, was like, oh, maybe it'll catch a seed, and that would be like a little microclimate with a little more shade and a little more moisture in it, and it would help grow a new thing. It's probably not that, but that's true too. But, you know, that was interesting. My favorite one was this man in Harare in Zimbabwe, Sukuru, and he said he would go to the place where he was going to collect, and he would bring with him some food, some rice or some shima, which is like a corn flour mashed potato mix. It's not potato, but it looks like mashed potato. And he would bring some tobacco. And so here we've got cross-cultural transitions because tobacco is there even though it comes from here. And he would go to the largest grandfather tree and he'd place the food down. and he would say, thank you very much, and he would sprinkle the tobacco around the tree, and he would say, thank you very much, I'll come back tomorrow. And so that was the first time there was a temporal component to the gratitude. And so it wasn't just thank you very much and asking permission to take and telling me what I'm going to use it for. It's like, hey, I really appreciate you, and I'll come back tomorrow to collect. And so he was always able to fill his bag quickly, and the plants made themselves apparent. So that was, I think, the gratitude, for the answer to your question, is just like walking in that way of gratefulness. Good question, thank you. Any other questions about Kanna more specifically, or me? I'm also happy to talk about me. Yeah.
What is the, because you mentioned the snuff, and I've been enjoying this smokable version, which I mix with the spliffs and everything, but as a powder replacement, how much farther does it have to be pulverized, or what does that process look like?
So there's really two kind of answers to that as a product question. There's the plant itself, which would need to be super microfine powdered, like in a ball mill kind of thing, or sifted, like the plant matter I have. What I'll do is when I pour it, the super fines kind of poof up in a cloud, and then I just stick my nose in the bag and I sniff it. And that's a fine way to do it, but it's not a way to get it to people. So there's the plant matter, and you can only sniff so much plant matter before your nose gets locked up with plants. And then there's the alkaloid, which is that dissolves. And so that you can sniff, and it will dissolve, and then kind of act more like the compounds that people are more used to sniffing. And so I don't have a strong practice with sniffing things, and so it's that's why that one's still in kind of R&D for me. But I do know that the dosage of the alkaloidal powder is very strong. And so people were overdoing it, because I'd be like, oh yeah, dose is the size of a grain of rice, and then they want to do a whole line, it's part of the ritual. So I realized that's why I have to cut it with something I'm thinking an allantois, monk fruit sugar, maybe cacao or something else like that, so that it smells and tastes nice too. So that's my thought around that. But yeah, very, very finely powdered.
I'll have to take the other questions offline.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I have just one last thing to conclude with is that, the currency of the universe is attention. That's why you pay attention. So thank you so much for your time and your attention. I feel very rich right now. Thank you, Dee. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, appreciate you.